Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining us for our webinar today, how to optimize your digital advertising for customers and not for clicks. Just as a quick setup for our conversation today, digital advertising for the first time this year is going to surpass spending on traditional media. I think there are a lot of reasons why. Digital advertising has a lot that's good about it, right? It's highly targetable, very efficient, it's very easy to manage. Probably more important than anything, right? That's where people's attention is more and more being spent today. But the challenge is that if you are a marketer who is trying to drive business for a business with retail locations or for offline some way for offline locations, there is no way to connect the ultimate result of your digital advertising with what happens in those real world or offline locations. Ultimately, that's what this is about, right? You want customers, not just online engagement, not just clicks. So the topic for today is to understand practical ways that you can optimize that digital spend to drive in-store results, not just the online engagement. The agenda for today is to, I'll spend a few minutes kind of setting up the topic, talking about why this is an important topic, some of the challenges that we're going to be trying to address. And then we'll spend most of our time, I want to turn the conversation to a panel that we've put together for the conversation today. I'll introduce our speakers in just a couple of seconds. And then we'll save about 10 minutes at the end of the session for open Q&A. That's when we'll get to any questions that you might have during the session. We'll address those live at the end of the session. We're planning on about 45 minutes today. So we're going to wrap up at about 10:45 Pacific. Brief housekeeping for today. I'm sure this is not your first webinar. We, of course, want to make sure that all the technical parts of the conversation today are working. So if you could use the GoToWebinar console to put your hand in the air and let us know that you are hearing everything okay. We just want to make sure that the audio is coming through loud and clear for the audience. Yes, looks like it's working for everybody. That's great. Your phone lines are muted, right? This is a one-way conversation. You are able to submit comments or questions through the question console in the GoToWebinar control panel there. So please, at any point during the conversation today, feel free to put through a question. We'll try to respond to those in real time, and anything that we can't get to in real time or anything that's meant for the entire audience, we'll save for our Q&A at the end of the session. We are recording today, and we'll share the recording with everybody who has registered. So if you would like to share the webinar with anybody else who may be interested or re-listen to it later, you'll be able to do that. So let's get on to introductions to our speakers today. We're joined today by a couple of experts on this topic of how to use digital advertising for in-store results. Joining us is Dan Bamuk. Dan is the CEO at Dreambox. Dreambox is an interesting agency, actually. They are the leading agency in the country for restaurants. They work specifically with restaurants of all kinds, everything from QSR all the way to fine dining. They've worked with more than 100 brands over the years. A lot of the brands that they're currently working with include, Yard House, Johnny Rockets, House of Blues, The Habit, quite a range of impressive brands. So Dan, welcome today. Thanks for joining us.
Mike, thank you.
Also today we have Kai Umezawa. Kai is a colleague of mine here at ZenReach. Kai is one of the founders here at ZenReach, and he's responsible for our product team. Kai spent his early career at Google and Facebook, a couple of brands everybody is aware of, obviously big players in the advertising world. At Facebook, he helped them with the shift from desktop-based interactions to the mobile world. And at Google, spent a lot of time working on Google Now, which was their speech assistant. Both of those experiences led to a real interest in the way that digital advertisers could connect the performance of that advertising with what was really happening in their stores. And he became, as a result of that interest, a founding member here at ZenReach, where the founding vision was all about how to help offline merchants use their digital marketing more effectively. Right, so Kai, really glad to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike.
So here, as we get started, is kind of the crux of the issue. More and more people are spending time online, right? That is where people's attention is being spent. And as I pointed to earlier, one of the main implications is that is where more and more advertising dollars are being spent. But here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, right? In spite of all of the talk about the death of retail, the growth of big online retail players like Amazon, kind of lead us to think that people are not shopping in brick and mortar stores anymore, doing all of their restaurant dining through takeout applications and things like that, but it's really not the case. I think the last number I saw was 87% of retail is still being done in real world locations. And the graph here kind of illustrates the continued growth of offline spending. So one of the great things about online advertising is that it delivers measurable results. And if you're an online merchant, one of the great things is that you can actually track your investment, your marketing investment, all the way through to an online conversion and calculate very accurate return on ad spend, return on investment. This is all great, obviously, unless you run an offline business, in which case your ability to connect your online spending with the in-store results is really challenged. There's no practical way to directly connect the results of the digital advertising with the in-store result. There are some ways that it's being accomplished. We're going to spend some time talking about the way that this is being accomplished today. But for the most part, it's a lot of guesswork. It's a lot of modeling. It's a lot of assumptions, and it's basing an awful lot of the assessment of your digital advertising on online engagement rather than what's really happening in your business. So here's a little bit of interesting data that we've discovered. We tracked dozens of campaigns, millions of online impressions during the fourth quarter of 2018. And here's what the data showed us. Online targeting, at least in these cases that we looked at, led in very direct proportion to online engagement, right? The people that you targeted online tended to be the same people who were engaging with your content or the experiences that you were directing them to online. But when you actually follow those same respondents through to the next step, right? Did they, after being exposed to an ad, engaging online with an ad, actually walk into a retail location? And what we saw was pretty startling. Yes, people responded, but they responded in nowhere near the kinds of proportions that we expected. And in the specific case that we're looking at here, males over 35 responded at a rate of about 4 times males in the younger groups, males under 35. So when you start to think about the implications this can have for your targeting, allocation of your ad spend, if maybe this is a core audience, how you evaluate the success of the creative or the offer that you put together, there are pretty profound implications that could have a really big impact on the performance of that ad spending. So this is the focus of the conversation that we want to have today, and the reason we've invited Kai and Dan to join us, right? We want to put practical questions to them to understand what can you do in order to optimize your online advertising if what you're interested in is an in-store result. So I want to pull Kai and Dan into the conversation. I've got a number of questions that I want to put to them in order to dig into this topic. And then, like I said, we'll turn the conversation to your questions in the closing part of the session today. All right? Dan, great. Kai, you guys all ready to go?
Great.
Let's do it.
All right. All right. So the first question is kind of setting the scene here, guys. Why are marketers, right, who are interested in in-store traffic, in-store results, using these online success metrics? And Kai, this is something I know you spend a lot of time looking at. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, and I think it all starts with some of the earlier points we're making about the fact that a lot of their customers' attention is moving online, and as a result of that, they want to take their marketing from more traditional means into the online space across social, display, search. And if you think about it, those platforms were primarily built for online businesses. And so a lot of the success metrics, a lot of the outcomes that are being measured on those platforms are geared towards online business. Having spent a lot of time at Facebook and Google, a huge portion of those their customer bases when it comes to advertising are e-commerce stores. And so quite naturally, the metrics that end up in the products there and the metrics that the product teams are focused on over there are primarily online metrics. So I think when you start to dip your toe into digital and start to invest there, it's very easy to look to the metrics that are being provided to you. And let's be honest, I think a lot of those metrics are also fun to look at and make you feel good. If you post on Facebook and you get 1,000 people to like your post, that feels really, really good as a marketer.
Right.
And so it's natural to fall back on that and maybe not take the next step, which is how close is that really to the outcome that I'm looking for.
Yeah. So Dan, I'm curious, what are your clients' expectations? My perception anyway is that a lot of these marketers don't expect anything more than these online metrics, and they're perfectly content with them. Has that been your experience?
It's an interesting part of the time that we're in right now, where there are so many ad tech companies, where different channels where brands are spending ad dollars, where during an initial demo or during a walkthrough of their reporting engine, so many of the metrics that are provided that are really trying to be used to determine an ROI are based on those digital specific numbers, things like engagement, things like likes and followers. And to what Kai mentioned, that it's something that as the marketer, you look back and you say, hey, great, we have a win there. But of course, leadership looks at that and says, well, the objective of what we're spending our marketing dollars, our advertising dollars on, are not just to get followers, but specifically to drive sales. And it's being able to connect these different moving parts, which as an agency partner, especially one that works in a very competitive space, where when we are competing with other fellow agencies or other ad tech companies that come in and have their own metrics, making sure that there is enough of an apples to apples comparison often means that we're looking at digital spend numbers versus in-store sales numbers. And so it's just a part of the excitement of what happens right now of trying to work to connect those dots as much as possible.
Yeah. And so turning this to the next question then, I'm curious, what kind of challenges does that create for your clients? What kind of challenge does that create for you in trying to demonstrate success and demonstrate real business impact from the digital programs that you're putting together for your clients?
It is something that when you look at the effort that goes into working to infer an impact of a campaign to top line sales, we have some great partners in the space that really are looking at how to comparatively analyze, in the case of restaurants, same store sales growth year over year, and looking at what other events may be happening that are either campaign driven or weather driven or new store opening or competitive driven if another brand is opening next door or across the street. But all of that is based on inferring the impact of ad spend around top line sales. When trying to get into the idea of, hey, I want to know more than just an interpretation of my sales, I actually want to see how many guests were brought in from an ad campaign that we ran. That's the challenge right now, that for offline businesses, primarily restaurants that we work with, that connecting of the dots, if you don't want to be a brand that discounts everything, because of course discounts are trackable, but if you don't want to discount your way to bankruptcy, then you find yourself in a position of wanting to connect sales with ad spend in a way that doesn't just rely on discounting.
I think you just created a quote there. Discount your way to bankruptcy. I think people are writing that down right now. That's good. Kai, what would you add?
Yeah, I think obviously the topic of this conversation is a lot about the challenges around the marketer, and that's really real. You know, as Dan mentioned, you got to report up to leadership on what kind of business outcome you're driving, and I think that's a huge topic of this conversation. I think one thing we've heard from our customers is that another way that real world businesses are different than online is there's just different operational challenges as well. So, one example of a customer I spoke to, how do you even allocate your ad spend across a set of locations if you don't know where the business is ultimately resulting in, right? For an online business, it's great. If it's an online store, all of that ad spend can be dedicated to that store. But if that spend is meant to drive business across 20 locations or 5 locations, how do you actually associate that spend on the P&L? So I think there's a bunch of marketing challenges associated around measurement and understanding, but there's also a bunch of operational challenges as well.
Yeah. And not just the online store, but what page are they visiting? What product are they buying?
That's right.
Where is that process getting hung up along the way?
That's right.
There's so much deeper understanding of what's happening from the impression through to the final transaction.
That's absolutely right.
So Dan, you talked a little bit about discounting your way to bankruptcy, obviously. So, coupons are one way to track in-store visits and connect them to an online advertising campaign. I'm curious, what else your clients are doing currently to try and, understand the performance of their digital advertising.
Well, generally, the most common way to measure for whether it's a programmatic campaign, whether it's something that you're doing on social, is you're looking at the desire to see a store visit. The tough part is unless you have something that's there at every single location and some way that then reports back to some cloud that says, hey, we had this person come in, you're really left with a panel-based or a sampling-based model. And this is something that every one of the ad tech companies that's out there that sells these very sexy dashboards where one can draw polygons around stores and say, I'm looking after this and I'm going after these personas. The targeting is what they're really focusing on, because the optimization and the ROI is all driven by a sampling-based model, because they don't have an installation in every store. They don't have something that can report back to the channel in near real time for optimization. And so what they're focusing on is the ability to target, but not necessarily the ability to optimize guest for guest. And it's one of the reasons why we, as a fellow vendor partner in the space, are so excited about what you guys have put together, because it really means that now, instead of being in a position where when a client comes to us and says, I'm looking to drive these kinds of sales, and I want to be able to also demonstrate effectiveness of the spend, because of course the agency is held to an expectation that when we make a recommendation for a specific ad channel, that we're going to make our customer money. And when we can come back to them and say, hey, this previous campaign that you ran a year ago, that you had some metrics that showed how many guests came through, well, that was based on a sampling methodology that really looked at a very small number of users nationally. And you look at especially in the case of restaurants, where there is not this huge amount of frequency. Like, you compare models that apply to gas station companies. In each market, there's probably 5 different gas station brands. So I'm very likely, if I drive a gas-powered car, I'm very likely going to one of them probably once a week. But when we look at restaurants in a market area, we could have hundreds, if not thousands, of restaurants in a market area, where someone is very unlikely to go to the same one every week, unless it's Starbucks, where you're then going through and left in a position that sampling-based model just doesn't provide the real-time optimization for the ad spend. And so driving store visits tends to be very expensive. And then you compare that with the ROI piece, where, of course, the agency wants to make sure that they're not just giving marketer numbers that let us all pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, look at this great engagement that we drove, or look at these store visits that our ad tech partner came back and showed that's really based on a sampling model from other categories of retail that they're saying should work for restaurants, but really when you dive into the data, it doesn't. That's what is this challenge for offline world businesses to be able to drive sales in a way that they can optimize for and report on effectiveness for.
So you're describing these panel and sample-based approaches. It sounds like they work at scale, at least, to within some kind of margin of error, right? You work with a number of like regional, scrappier kinds of brands. Are there any creative ways currently that they're measuring success?
And that's where the most I'll say, and then there's an operational impact for a brand that has the ability to accept one-time use coupons. Then certainly that is one way that you can go and message out one-time use coupons. You can couple that with an ad spend, and then you can track that the guest came in. So effectively what you're doing is you're double paying. You're paying the ad dollars to go and get the guest to see the ad. then you're turning around and subsidizing the cost of their first visit, because then you've gone through and discounted your product. And especially in the case of restaurants where you have this very narrow profit margin that you're working with, when there's this double dipping of what impacts profitability, you have the scenario that it's very easy to say, hey, let's use this because we can turn around and show how many people came into the campaign. But there's also a little bit of an operational impact, because now you're pausing a little bit for something to get scanned, especially given restaurants have such high turnover, making sure that people are really trained on how to use this. And then you turn around and want to be in a model where you can drive the sustainably profitable business. So it's not just, hey, let's continue to discount because we can track it. That's nice. We know what we brought in terms of sales. But when you look at the sustainability of it, the profit piece of that equation starts to become injured. And that's the objective that we always have as an agency partner, that when you look at how narrow that profit margin is in the restaurant space, the need to look outside of that historical coupon discounting based model and say, let's focus on much better targeting, let's focus on real-time optimization, and then let's demonstrate ROI for the ad spend without needing to discount.
Got it. So we're throwing around these terms like panel-based and sample-based methodologies. I don't want to assume everybody knows what we're talking about. I think it's worth getting into not the nitty-gritty, but at least a kind of a little explanation of what those things are. And obviously, these are the methodologies applied by Facebook and Google. So Kai, maybe just a real quick explanation of, when Dan's talking about these panel and sample-based approaches, can you describe briefly what he's talking about and how those work?
Yeah, so a lot of the technology approaches, the big problem with a lot of them, I'll start with the problem and then I'll back into how they work and why it's a problem. The big problem is the precision or the fidelity or the predictability of where they're sourcing their data from. And so maybe historically that data might have come from a survey. This is one way to think about it. But if you're at a survey, you could only survey a small subset of the customers and they might not all complete the survey. And so you'd have this issue where you're trying to make decisions based on a subset of your customers. What that looks like today is...
It's just simple. People reporting, like they get a survey that says, did you visit this store? Did you visit this restaurant?
That's right. That was probably the first iteration, a lot of this stuff. What it looks more like today is that these technology companies and these advertising platforms, they're getting lots of data from people at any given point, whether it's an app on a phone or a check-in in a check-in app and whatnot. And what they're doing is they're taking that data that they're collecting from maybe the 5% of the people who have the app open when they're in the store, and then they're trying to project that out to say, okay, if 100% of the people have the app open, here's what we predict the results would be. The challenge with that is that from a targeting perspective, someone might be visiting your storefront all the time and might not have the app open when they visit, so they'll not look like a very, very loyal customer to you, when in fact they are. And then on the measurement side, you could have both false negatives where people are visiting and not being counted, and then because you're projecting forward, a lot of false positives as well. We think if you were to scale this out, you get this much lift in your traffic, when really that's a model or a sample-based approach rather than a true one-to-one, this customer saw this ad and we're very confident that they ended up in your store.
Got it. That makes sense. Thanks for that explanation. So a lot of this is connected to the term marketing attribution, right? I'm interested, why don't we start with you on this one? Like, what attribution is one of these words we hear a lot that I don't know that people really understand all that well. What is marketing attribution? I don't think it's that hard to explain, but it's maybe hard to measure, right? So maybe a little like, what is it and why is it so hard to measure?
So marketing attribution is the ability to attribute a dollar that your business receives from a customer to a piece of marketing initiative or campaign that your business has run to drive that outcome. And a lot of us are doing a lot of things across the board when it comes to marketing, right? For a physical world retailer, you might put a sign up out in front of the business. That's a form of marketing. You might buy a newspaper ad. You might run a Facebook campaign online. And so marketing attribution would be if Mike walks into my store and makes a purchase, which of those marketing initiatives were the reason for which Mike came in, because then I as a marketer can say, that's really effective, I should quadruple down on that.
Got it. Dan, I'm curious, you work with quite a range of brands and levels of sophistication. Is attribution something that they are talking about, something they understand, something they're working with?
It is the justification for why or why not to continue with their agency partner. So it's certainly something that we live and breathe every day because it's the way that we can demonstrate our value to our customers. When looking at the comparative space where, and we run into this a lot when a client is trying to compare what they have seen historically that's really based on that panel-based model. And that's where we always say to a client, hey, if you're looking at comparing last year's report from next year's report, dig further into the methodology of how those store visits were counted. Because if you see names like Placed or Nielsen, or you're seeing something that is a panel-based company as the source of the data, then you know right away that it's something that is not based on actual visits. And the real challenge also then is wanting to make sure that when the numbers are verifiable, that you have as much accountability as possible. And so it's very much something that our customers are living and breathing every single day. Every one of our customers has very finite ad spend budgets. We haven't found that client yet with a blank check that says, hey, spend as much as you want to be able to go and hope you're driving sales. Every one of our customers comes to us with an expectation that when we're making a recommendation, it's based on a channel that we can drive sales and that we can drive sales as inexpensively as possible, and that we can turn around and provide verifiable metrics on the fact that the ad spend is responsible for driving those sales.
Got it.
And maybe just on the second portion of that question, like why is it a challenge? Well, specifically for physical world businesses, it's a challenge because the campaigns are being run digitally, but the business is happening in store, and there's not a great way to tie those outcomes in store to online. And maybe furthermore, if you think back to why attribution is important, if you want to be applying your dollars to the best channel or the best platform or the best initiative, and all those platforms and channels are using different methodologies to calculate how effective they're being, it's actually really hard to compare those apples to apples.
So, I mean, I've done a little bit of research into attribution and the ways that attribution is calculated. I'm a marketer, right? And I very quickly get lost in theoretical white papers and different modeling techniques and things like that seem nice. It's a great thing to do a thesis paper on, right? But they don't seem very practical. And this is an area where I know there's been a lot of innovation in recent years. So, Kai, why don't we start with you on this one? Like, what are these emerging methods for more effectively and more directly calculating attribution? How do they work?
Well, maybe I'll point first to what happened online, and then I can speak to ZenReach a little bit. I think one of the evolutions that happened online was you start to see a lot more independent measurement technology platforms come out, where it's not Facebook or Google or anybody grading their own homework, but there's an independent third party that's using the same methodology across all those platforms, so that even in the event that the measurement isn't perfect, at least you're comparing all your initiatives on the same scorecard. So that's something that evolved online that we at ZenReach really believe is going to happen in the physical world as well. And then I would say, in terms of what's happening in the physical world right now, I think there's this realization that not only have advertising platforms moved to digital and online, but a lot of the technology in the store is going online as well. All these things that previously used to be offline systems,
POS, for example,
whether it's the point of sale, whether it's the networking infrastructure, whether it's the comment cards and the placement orders, all of those things are moving digital. And as a result of that, all of those things are collecting data in the cloud. And so I think a trend that you're seeing in the industry right now is that you can use that in-store data as that truth one-to-one signal of whether or not the person who came in can be tied back to some digital platform.
That's great. Well, so it probably makes sense, Dan, to turn this next question to you, right? Assuming we are able to directly measure the results in store from your digital advertising, what does that allow you to do as a marketer? What does that allow you to do for your clients that you couldn't do before?
There are two parts to this that I think are so crucial. When we look at the value of being able to leverage this platform, the reason why we're so excited about it is there's two pieces. One is, of course, showing ROI. So when customer says, how many verified store walkthroughs did we drive where we know that this device saw our ad, they had not been in our restaurant ever since the ZenReach device was installed in the restaurant, and we see that this many came in within 1 week or within 2 weeks after seeing the ad. That sort of ROI measurement that is not based on trying to infer top-line sales, not based on hoping that the sampling model is correct, but actually knowing that this specific number of devices that had never been in the restaurant came in after seeing our ad, that's huge. That ROI helps to answer that marketer's question of half my marketing works, I just don't know which half. Okay, so we've answered that. The other part, though, that is so compelling about this is it's not just ROI, it's real-time optimization. So when Facebook is going through and serving up multiple versions of your ads, and they're optimizing, you can optimize for engagement, you can optimize for clicks to website, you can optimize for store visits, but when you're feeding Facebook data that says, hey, these are the email addresses that we have seen in our restaurants in the past couple of days, in the past hour, in the past week, and that continually gets fed into Facebook. Facebook in real time is optimizing the delivery of their ads based on who they're seeing come in. So you imagine the headaches as a marketer when you're coming through and trying to, from day one, okay, let's identify our archetype customers, let's identify our personas, let's look at their expected interests and attributes, and let's start to go and build ad campaigns around this and prove the concept. It's a lot of lift for the advertiser to be able to go through and understand many details about who your customers are. Or you stop and you say, or we can just look at who's actually coming in, who the ZenReach device has been able to see, and turn around and start running ads that are targeting these people that match similar criteria, but happen to not be them because we want to go after new customers. And so that's where it's that real-time optimization along with the ROI measurement that when we look at the benefits of this piece, it's a very compelling offering.
So I'm curious if you've got any real live examples to talk about and what the results look like, and how managing a campaign in this way was different perhaps from the way that you've managed them for your clients historically.
I have an example that and this is something that we certainly appreciate having been involved with the product now for a while, and being able to run some early campaigns with customers. There's one client in particular. They have roughly 200 stores in the U.S., and they started with one location, and they wanted to go and run a test campaign for that one store to prove the concept. And being able to see very quickly how the cost per acquisition had dropped down to a single-digit dollar level was something that was very compelling. So then you look and say, okay, let's compare that to our other channels and seeing what that cost per acquiring a new customer was. And then you turn around and have leadership very excited for a channel that is verifiably driving new customers at a very low cost per acquisition. And that customer was so in love with the results that they saw that they've now gone back and ramped up that campaign to be able to look at potentially going system-wide. And so looking at the results for customers, we have another client that's a smaller brand. This is a 5-unit concept. And being able to begin to see after the campaign has started how quickly the platform from this data feed between the ZenReach platform and Facebook in this case are able to optimize the spend. You see in the reporting that we get a very quick drop in that cost per acquisition, where then you are able to now focus on things like, all right, what other channels do we want to look at? This idea of driving store visits, this is doing it at such a low cost that we can now put our marketing effort and energy around other elements, whether they're four walls advertising, whether we're going after our existing customers to drive an increased frequency. But that's I think some 2 good case studies for right now.
That's terrific. That's terrific. And so, Kai, I mean, you've worked with a bunch of clients who are running these programs, which has given you kind of a broad perspective on performance and keys to success. The last thing I wanted to ask you both are, any broad learnings, any particular suggestions that you have for advertisers?
Yeah, I think, at a high level, it's to get started with some of this stuff, but what does that really mean? And I think it falls into maybe two buckets of tips. The first bucket is to change the language and thinking around your strategy. And by that, I mean, when it comes to measurement, how close is your measurement to the actual outcome you're looking for, and really pushing your thinking there to get as close to the outcome that you're looking for as possible. But not just on the measurement, also on the planning and strategy and targeting side. How well do we actually understand our customers, and questioning whether or not that's based on real world facts or based on intuition. We have a number of customers. It's very it's always fun to work with them, because when we first come in, there will be a lot of assumptions that our top customers look like this, they behave this way, and they come in at these times. And so those are the folks that our marketing is going to resonate best with. But a lot of the times we find that those are based on hunches, and over the first few campaigns that we're able to run, we're able to get closer to what the results are. And so just to push the thinking around strategy, what are you basing both your measurement and your planning on? So that would be the first bucket. And then the second bucket around just getting started is more of a practical recommendation. I think there's a lot of solutions out there that can be intimidating, because they require that you get going across your whole network of locations right off the bat, and the spends are really, really high. My tip is try to find ways to start small. The way that we as marketers would do this online, we wouldn't carve off a huge budget until we're sure something's working. Right? Exactly. And so I think that same bar should exist for physical world businesses as well. Really push to try to find a way to just get started, start small, see what's working, be really confident that it's working, and then to Dan's point, scale out from there. So those are sort of the two tips I would have.
And Dan, how about you? Any practical suggestions for the people listening today?
For me, and it's something that we gently bump up against probably almost daily, is that trepidation around changing what the belief is. Hey, this has been working. We're going to keep doing this. These channels that are not directly attributable, whether they are money that gets spent on a billboard, or whether there's something that's done on broadcast television, or whether there's something that's done based on a targeting model that, to what Kai had mentioned, that's sort of the gut feeling, or based on a hunch, or based on the panel-based research that may have been done on defining who are the archetype customers or prototypical customers that a brand may be focusing their ad spend dollars on. And when branching away from that comfort level and saying, all right, let's go and run a test to be able to see if this approach is viable for the brand. There's another client of ours that's a 14-unit brand that's in, I think, 3 states, and being able to see for them something that, and they're not a brand that historically spent a lot on paid advertising. And so being able to get them dipping their toes into this world, their mandate to us was, if we're going to spend more, make sure that you can verify that it's doing something. And so, of course, this opened the doors to being able to give them that kind of reporting. But it's getting out of that comfort zone where the spend recommendations and the process is based on a channel that you can hang your hat on and say, yep, this is not just sample based. This is not us trying to infer from top line sales. This may be something that we've never done before. We may be pulling some dollars from an existing channel, but now we can not only optimize in real time, but we can report on the effectiveness of that spend.
That's great. Thank you. So those are the questions that I prepared for our conversation. We've got a little more than 5 minutes left for some open Q&A. A number of questions have been coming through during the session. Everybody in the audience, if you have a question, you haven't put it through yet, now's a good time to put it through. We'll get to as many of these as we can. We'll kind of go rapid fire. I'm going to start with the questions that have been asked more than once, assuming that those are the most popular ones out there. Everybody always wants to know what things cost. A lot of questions about, gee, this sounds kind of expensive, sounds kind of complicated. Dan, maybe I turn this to you, right? You were working with regional brands. Not all these are huge brands with huge budgets. Practically speaking, like what kinds of budgets are you talking about here? What does it take to kind of get started?
What's so helpful with this model is this is something that, given the granularity of the targeting, that we have customers that can start an ad spend like this for less than $1,000 a month. We have other customers that can ramp that up beyond that. But when you look at a dollar amount that can provide verifiable sales, and then you pause and say, hey, we spent a few $100s for this store this month. We drove this many new guests, times that by your average check amount, we now see an ROI amount for this channel. Let's double it next month. Let's triple it the following month. It's something that is not just based on hoping that it's working, because when you start normally in the historical reporting models with a few $100 ad spend for a store that's bringing in $2 million in a year, you're going to come back and say, well, we could have just had a rough week. It could have rained that week. It's hard to be able to infer any sort of lift in sales from that. But when there's a model that you can track spend to a guest that had never been in the restaurant that saw the ad, you can start with a very small ad spend amount, prove the concept, and then ramp up from there. And that's what I think is so exciting about it.
Got it. In addition to what's it cost, there are a lot of what I'll call like, how does it work questions, right? We kind of talked at a high level about direct attribution and offline attribution. Kai, can you just give a really quick explanation about what we're talking about, how we're connecting digital advertising with in-store results?
Yeah, and this is probably the biggest difference with ZenReach relative to maybe a lot of the other solutions that you might find out there. ZenReach's approach is we just use the in-store data. It's not rocket science. We're not going out and buying data from other folks. We partner with our customers and look at what in-store data they have that is tied to customer interactions today. So some examples of that would be the Wi-Fi data. If you have a public Wi-Fi hotspot that customers are logging into and their devices are pinging when they walk in the door, you can be really, really confident that that customer is there when that happens. A lot of retailers have point of sales now that either collect some form of credit card information or collect an email for an email receipt. That is another piece of customer interaction data that can be used. And so, the list goes on of types of in-store data. But
lots of ways to know someone's been in the store, but then how do you go back and figure out whether or not that person's been exposed to an ad?
That's right. So what ZenReach does is it pools all of those pieces of data together and maps it so that we get as holistic a view of Mike as possible. And then ZenReach will use that data for targeting. And then as the campaigns are running, ZenReach has technology that will continue to monitor those data points post-campaign to view if any of the people that were impressed with the ad physically showed up in the store again. And that's how we're tying it together. So it's a direct tie between who saw the ad and then did that person have some in-store interaction down the road.
Really good. We're getting close to time. I think time for one or two quick questions. There are a lot of popular advertising platforms out there. There are a couple of questions here about, does this work with any ad platform, or is it available only on particular ad platforms?
So the good news is ZenReach's approach is to be platform agnostic, right? We want to partner with the advertiser, with the marketer, with the customer to be an independent single source across all of their channels. Today, ZenReach is working on some of the more popular platforms that we've heard from our customers: Facebook, Instagram. We're starting up a Google. But our aspiration as a company is to do that across all channels. Of course, we also do it with email today through another one of our products. But any digital platform where our customers want to engage with their prospects and their customers, that's where ZenReach plans to be.
That's great. I think we could go on for a while with this conversation, and there are plenty more questions to get to, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and it's the buzzer has sounded. It's time to wrap it up. So Dan, Kai, thanks very much, you guys, for joining us and sharing the experience with us today. It's a great topic. Obviously, it runs deep. I think it's a topic that we'll want to carry on with in other webinars and find new angles on it. So really appreciate you guys joining us to share the wisdom today. Everyone in the audience, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time, spending a little time with us today. We would enjoy hearing from you. Any comments on how we did today, simply reach out to hello@zenreach.com, hello@zenreach.com, and we'll get back to you to answer questions or have some follow-on conversations if you would like. And that's what we've got for today. Appreciate you guys joining us. We will be sharing the recording with everybody who signed up afterwards, so look for that as a follow-up in the next day or so. With that, we'll wrap it up for the day. Thanks.
Thank you.